Just making sure. All right, hey everybody. Welcome to the Sneaker Convo panel, and we're going to be getting all into sustainability. It seems to be going in every single press release we're seeing from sneakers now, and I think it's something that we really want to dive into and kind of demystify so people can get a better idea of where we really are in sneakers and how footwear is changing and how it's going to change in the next couple of years, and why sustainability is more just than, a cool term, then it's more than just upcycling. There's so much that goes into sustainable development in footwear. So I'm really excited. I'm Megan Ann Wilson. I do footwear development and design, mostly in the sustainable space, and work with pro athletes. And we have some amazing people here today who come from all different areas within the sustainable footwear community. So first we have Jeremy Green. He's one of the founder of Calling All Creators, creative design studio and concepts. We have Olivier Mouzin from Solomon, who works in sustainability. They have this really cool Index 0.1 shoe that is like a closed loop shoe. So it's fully made to biodegrade and to be recycled. We have Chloe Songer from Thousand Fell. Her shoe line is all about using regenerative materials. It's about recycling through the Loop program that we have here in the United States. And we have Tim Gibb from Tidal, who makes these amazing flip-flops made of polyurethane. So instead of making an EVA foam, they're made from a sneaker material. And each time they're making these flip-flops, they're recycling the material again. So it becomes more and more regenerative as it goes. Thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to get into this.
Absolutely.
So what we'll start off is, I think it'd be great to give people an idea of what part of the sustainability industry kind of you work in within footwear and how it really involves your work, because I think something when people are really into footwear, they don't always understand, and this is something that's come up a lot in conversation, like what does a designer do? What does a developer do? But I think everyone here has a different kind of viewpoint of sustainability and how it forms what they do every day in footwear. So Jeremy, I'd love to hear from you first.
Yeah, sure. So I probably am I would say the most unique of this group. And that's simply because I went to Arizona State's University School of Sustainability. So my background in footwear and sneakers is far less than my background in sustainability. But yeah, I started Calling All Creators way back in 2016. I'll say way back, but back in 2016. But yeah, originally fresh out of college, actually worked for Tesla and worked for their innovation program. So for me, when it comes to sustainability, it's including the larger equitable conversation. And it's not just a green term or a materials term or things like this. It's an entire system, which I love seeing in the market now as it pertains to like closed loop systems and actually sort of reframing what we think about products and goods when it comes to consumers and brands.
It's so cool. And I'm sure, people, when they hear Tesla, they automatically want to just talk about Elon. They want to talk about certain parts of it, but there's so much more that goes into it, and so much time and so much resources. And we could talk forever, I'm sure, about, who killed the electric car, but we're here on shoes now. But thanks for sharing that. Now, Olivier, you're coming to us from France. So thanks so much for joining us later in the day. I would love to hear it. I was so impressed by the Loop shoe you guys have built. So I'd love to hear about being a sustainability and manager in footwear, what kind of does that entail for your job there?
Yeah, I will jump to what Jeremy just said. I think the sustainability is really a full loop, and when we start to work on sustainability, we really need to take into account everything from the creation of the product to the distribution, and even go further, what we're gonna do with the product at the end of life. So we need working on sustainability. We need to work on every step, meaning creation, meaning production process, distribution, and the end of life. So there are many steps using recycled material, but we need to go further and be sure that we are producing product that we can recycle, and ensuring that at the end of the life, we are able to do something with the material, not just burning it or landfilling it.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly why we're all here, right? That's so interesting. And then Chloe, I know you originally came from fashion and being over in China and just seeing how production is there. Now with Thousand Fell, you have a way to recycle using the Loop program. How did that really inform the work you're doing with the company now? And when you were building the company, how important was sustainability and eco-friendly in every aspect of Thousand Fell?
Yeah. I forgot that I told you about China and my background. Guys, Megan and I had another conversation before.
Yeah.
It was just like awesome. I started my career kind of 8 or 9 years ago in China, in and out of factories, and so similar to Jeremy, maybe had a semi non-traditional entrance to fashion and retail. And I think really early in my career, got to see the means of production, like firsthand, not just on a dev trip, but like living there for multiple years, like in and out. And I think it's really hard to unsee what you've seen when you're there, and you're in a leather tannery, or you're in a footwear factory. I was in a sneaker cleat factory, and just the smell of the rubber and the leather and the cement and the burning. I mean, it's a really visceral experience. And so sustainability and thinking post when I left Gap, what I wanted to do and what my co-founder Stuart and I wanted to do if we started a company, it had to be closed loop. So Olivia, I'm so pumped to meet you, and Jeremy, you too, and even Tim, to hear about other people who are thinking about end of life, because in 2017, 2018, when we started talking about this, nobody was. And what happens to a product when you're done with it? And I would say on the sustainability question, Megan, what we think a lot about and what we're thinking a lot about now is we've like been in market for a year and been recycling. We actually have our own reverse logistics system that we recycle through, and we're partners with TerraCycle. But and then they have a Loop program, which is great, but we're not a part of Loop. But it's really, how can we start to shift this new economic model? So it's not just a take back program, because it doesn't have a ton of value to a consumer. But eventually, how do we get to a point where we're paying cash, or where we're valuing materials, and there's a true economic incentive for both brands like Thousand Fell or Solomon or Tidal to recycle because they want the value of that material, and then similarly for consumers to participate, because it is a little bit of an extra hurdle to send back to specific brands. So that, I would say, is one of the biggest things we're thinking through right now when it comes to sustainability.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that really also ties into what Tim's doing with Tidal and having this kind of micro factory and bringing manufacturing back here to the US, which I think is super exciting, and being able to actually know where a factory is and know it's there, and be able to employ people in a way that, is ethical and takes care of them, and have solar panels. So Tim, I'd love to hear about, what it was like to really grow this system from the ground up and really build kind of this new framework for a factory here in the States, because I know you're the first B Corp certified footwear factory in the States, right?
That's right. Yeah. So so Chloe, we should have another talk at some point, because my background's almost the exact same. So my brother and I came up. Our father ran international for Nine West Footwear Group for 25 years. And so it was sort of in our blood. We both tried to not be in footwear, and then it's a good industry. It's a fun industry. And so we ended up here, but we ended up in the production and sourcing end of things. So similarly to Chloe, we were overseas in factories, and whether it was, Asia, Mexico, Ethiopia, particularly more so in Asia, you're on the other side of the world, and there's this disconnect for the consumer from, what the means of production are and the product actually being in their hands. And so, we wrote our business plan in 2013 with sustainability all the way through it. So and even though that was like sort of halfway through like sustainability's life at that point, if you think about where we are now versus where we were then, that was like cutting edge to even talk about it. So that's always been something that is near and dear to our hearts. We had the B Corp handbook on our desk from day one. So being certified last month was just huge for us. But, we think about it similar to what everyone's been saying on this call is the materials are the most visceral thing the customer can actually touch, but sustainability is so much bigger than that. And so like for when we launched and we started to come to market, it was 2014, 2015, and there was a big Made in America push, and it was very much like the DoD had just committed to a big contract, and New Balance got it, and there was like a lot of headway about that. Then the 2016 election happens, and it becomes very much politicized. Not to go down that road now, but it became a political narrative, and that actually made it really difficult for us on one hand, because we had to kind of rethink how we wanted to talk about this. But on the other hand, it forced us to really actually change that narrative for the customer and say, hey, it's not about where, like it's about made local, and it's about micro factories, and it's about a community-based factory approach rather than this sort of gigafactory approach where it's all about the subsidies and these huge buildings. I think what everybody needs to understand is that the future of factories is actually micro factories, and it's about being closer to the consumer. So it's sort of like taking that last mile mindset to the factory level is where we see things going. So like for us, we're in a 10,000 square foot building. And we think that if you have the right model or the right sort of centers, whether it's LA's garment district or New York's fashion center, those are the types of centers that come up and build communities that are centered around that industry. And deindustrialization had a huge, huge impact on the States. And it wasn't just the Ford plants going out. It was about the garment district. It was about the textile mills in Massachusetts. It's all these things that went overseas. And that goes down to, that has huge intersectionality with what's going on inequality, down to whether you're talking about at the BIPOC level or otherwise. And so that's what people need to understand. I'm so happy that this is where we started the conversation, is that sustainability is not just about the product itself, but it's about the manufacture of it, where it's made, how it got there, and those inputs also. So that's the factory end of things. And then we work with all domestic suppliers also, because we're trying to help build that up. And our material supplier is they're not a multinational. They do have overseas outposts also, because that's where the manufacturing is. But they've worked with us on, we're pushing the envelope on the amount of bio content in our polyurethane. So polyurethane historically is a fossil-based material. We're up to 30% bio content in ours now. And we have some pretty exciting updates for later this year in that realm too. So sorry to take up so much airtime on the initial.
No, it's okay. I think it's great. We're all passionate about it. I'm sure we could all go into these long, tangents about it. There's been so many times where I've, just gotten on long conversations and we're like, okay, we get it, Megan. You're really passionate about it. But I think that really brings us to an important juncture, is designing to think about end of life, right? I think that is something that is so important, because often I've heard that, oh, well, if you take away glue from a shoe, it's going to fall apart. Oh, if you take away this. But I think part of that is understanding, the amount of components that goes into shoe, right? If you're looking at a traditional, let's say Jordan, it has something like 50, 60 components. But if you do, like, let's say a knit shoe or a one-piece upper and then, a midsole, maybe you're at 5 or 6. That's way less stuff you have to build. So I'd really like to hear from you, Olivier. We talked a little bit yesterday, you and I, about how to actually put it together and how to actually engineer. And when you're actually getting a shoe together, like the Index 0.1, how does that change making a shoe? Because you're thinking about every kind of cycle of life of it.
I have the microphone off. Sorry. Yeah, the thing is, you need to really think the product in a way that you locate the material, because today the fact is not to have many pieces. If you have many pieces of the same material, it's not an issue. It's not too much an issue. It's the fact, the main issue today is on a shoe, you've got at least, it depends on the shoe, but you get at least 5 types of material that you can't mix together. You've got some rubber, you've got some polyurethane, you've got some TPU, you've got some EVA, you've got some polyester. So the main thing is reduce the number of material family. That's the first step, I will say. And maybe on some sneakers, you don't have so many different families. That's maybe one point. And the second point is to locate the material at the right place in order to be easily separated. The best thing would be what Adidas is speaking about, and what On Running is speaking about with a mono material shoe. But the issue with the mono material shoe is on a shoe, you have to deal with comfort, you have to deal with abrasion, you have to deal with not dumping, but resiliency and those kind of things. So it's complicated to do a shoe with a mono material. So maybe we will be able to do that in a few years from now, but now it's really complicated. So you have to find a solution, and the solution we found in Salomon is to decide to choose only 2 materials, and in order to really have an envelope around the foot with comfort and all those things, and something with all the performance under the foot in order to bring resiliency, rebound, and things like that, and keep the abrasion we need in order for the shoe to last. And that's the main thing. And when you develop such a shoe, you must keep in mind that it's not because you made it recyclable that you allowed yourself to decrease the lifespan of the shoe. It's not because you're going to be able to recycle the material that you can do a consuming product. You must keep the same durability as the one you had at the beginning. That's all the thing you take into account. And it's impacting your process of production. And even this shoe, it's a first step. It's not perfect. There are some mistakes in it that we need to improve on the next one. But at least we decided to go for that in order to learn from it and to improve it on the long time.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of design, right? We're all about solving problems, right? It's all about that process and not necessarily being perfect. And I think that's something I always tell people when they're like, I don't know how to be more eco-friendly. And even Chloe and I have talked about, what do we call it? Eco-fatigue, when people are just so worried about every single choice. But hey, why don't we start small, you know, and be more consistent? And I think that's really exciting to hear with footwear is like, you know what, we're going to try, we're going to keep editing, we're going to keep going. And Chloe, what was that like for you in developing Thousand Felt? Because over at Salomon, it's more of a performance shoe. You guys have a lifestyle shoe. And thinking about deconstructing it and taking it apart, how much did that change the design and development process for you guys?
Yeah. I mean, the entire design and development process was very different. So rather than kind of, I think what maybe people don't totally realize with a lot of manufacturing right now is a lot of it's factory-led. Or mill-led or partner-led. And so the design is done in-house by in-house creative team or creative studio, and then you send to a factory and they come back with a proto, and they might be, a lot of the sourcing is actually sometimes done by factories or factory partners or factory development partners. And we had to completely take that on. So we were really fortunate, I think, early on to meet an awesome team with experience at Cole Haan and Nine West, Tim, and JC Penney and Converse and the whole nine, and really put together a team that could help us with sourcing and help us kind of rethink that development process. And then we ended up having to do all of the sourcing in-house. And the main thing that Olivier talked about that I couldn't agree with more is, you know, our very first couple of, and we're working on things that will come out in the next couple of years, you know, and over time. But our very first idea was a shoe entirely of like algae foam, and like we've now made shoes in almost anything. We've made prototypes with mycelium and with, you know, apple leather and fish skin and the whole nine. And where we landed and where we got back to it, and then we'll talk about materials in a minute, is recycled poly base with the corn waste bioresin. Like we landed with recycled plastic and natural rubber. Like we picked 2 main material feeds to design into that could be easily recycled at cost at scale in the US. And when you go through the full design thinking exercise, like it would be so awesome to have, you know, one shoe made of one material that could be broken down, but the cost of that shoe is plus $400. And I love the Futurecraft Loop team and love what Adi is doing, but the shoe is super expensive and they've only been able to make a few thousand. And our thought was, okay, well, maybe that's our goal by 2025, but what's the interim and what's that like initial progress look like? And so we ended up going with what we could get at cost at scale in the market quickly. So we could just start prototyping and start building reverse logistics for recycling. And so that, I mean, it was a true 18, 24 month like design thinking process. You're making decisions every step along the way. Like, you know, I'm really bad at sayings, but you know, perfection is the impediment of progress or something like that. But really, you know, there were things we had to trade out, like our insole. Like, I don't necessarily think it's the sexiest insole, but it's one we can easily pull apart and recycle. You know, it's not a composite that's, you know, cemented or heat based. It's like, it's a little bit different than what you might normally see. And so it, really was a full decision towards what could we recycle, how could we pull it apart, and what would not impact recycling.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that kind of brings us kind of more into the idea of like what's upcycling and how do you repurpose and things like that. So I know, Jeremy, I've noticed that it seems like you probably have a lot of people who want to, create shoes and have these projects. How often are the designers coming to you understanding how upcycling might affect their product, or how much is that kind of a thought process that comes behind? And is that ever something that, is and especially like what Chloe talked about too, is like, a lot of times you're not going direct to a factory, right? So how often does that change when you're working with young creatives who are designing and trying to make this kind of future concept shoe?
Yeah, great question, by the way. I think the simple answer is most people in sort of the traditional setting will be surprised how tapped in these kids are. And what I mean by that is, COVID unfortunately accelerated it a bit, but youth culture is really tapping into the creativity and more specifically the equitable side of that. So that's environmental, that's social, that's political, that's, you name it, right? Whatever you stand for, you stand for. But when it comes to just exploring creativity, it's a boom right now as far as like the creator economy. And we consider calling all creators our community prosumers. And because of that, they have a bit, I'll say, more elevated approach than just a sort of traditional designer or consumer rather, in that they're not just consuming something for the sake of consuming something. Chloe and Olivier hinted at what Adidas is doing. Very few people understand that Carbon is actually the company behind a lot of their tech stuff. And my personal thought is the brand itself should be solving their own problems and leave sort of the external stuff, materials, systems, things like this, for the people that really understand the market, i.e. the consumers, or in our case, the prosumers. So sort of long-winded there, but the kids are tapped in as far as like upcycling, and it's a theory and really a system that we're applying and sort of bringing to brands and introducing it in a larger collective perspective. Just because the individuals, can only do so much in a very noisy space, and not to mention when you have some of the bigger designers, well-known, accolade folks that are designing, they sort of own those narratives in that space, and it's great because they're also giving back to the community. People like Nicole McLaughlin and doing more educational things. So when it comes to that, it's just that resharing, or when we're talking about closed loop, it's not just the product, right? It's the information. And that's what we mean by equity, is sharing the process, sharing what that whole closed loop idea looks like, not just from a product standpoint and material standpoint, but how do you build systems? How do you build brands? How do you build better products? Uh-oh. I don't think that was supposed to happen.
I don't think so.
I guess till she comes back. I'd love you all.
I like what you're saying. That goes back to the whole idea of, and Elon, I guess, for his quips and his quirks, his open sourcing mindset is right, and that's this idea of competing with, not competing against, is really where the industry needs to go. Is we're not going to get out of this by each hoarding all the information in this sort of, it's like, that's how, if you want to get into an esoteric like version of how does shareholder primacy relate to stakeholder primacy, that's it. It's sharing information and not, which is tough, because when you get into the investment space, and Chloe probably knows this well, and Jeremy too, is defensibility is a big topic, and so it's like, well, we're in this funky space now where defensibility actually works against where we're trying to go in the future. And so so that gets really interesting too, as you get into this idea of taking on capital in this new world where we're trying to compete with, not against, and what does that all mean? That's probably a separate topic though, all on its own.
Yeah, like that's
I think that's really interesting. I think it's kind of this idea of like, maybe the future is open source, but closed loop, you know, and having these partnerships. Like when we saw that with like the mycelium stuff, you saw so many brands across so many categories that were putting the money towards it, because really when it comes to like researching all these material science things, like it doesn't happen for free, you know? So having brands collaborate more, I really think it is the process, because I think for so long, especially in footwear, it was all about like, you can't come in our innovation kitchen if you're at Nike. If you're at Adidas, like we have the Aramis machine, you can't see that. You know, like there's all these different really siloed things. And I think the more we can understand, not just as like people wanting to support each other, but as companies understanding that, do we really want to actually keep selling shoes for the next 50 years? Or do we want the planet to fall apart? Like maybe we need to work together, right? Because I think it's so funny that it's like, we work in an industry where basically the job is to make more stuff, but we're trying to do it in a way. So it's like, how do you reconcile this idea of being in a consumer, or as like Jeremy said, like a prosumer industry, but also do it in a way that will make things better, right? So I think that kind of can tie into this idea of when materials are getting upcycled or reused, you know, how well do they work? Because I've often seen people not understanding, and I think part of it is the problem with sustainability is things not being defined. Like, what does bio-based really mean? Like, are people still using that to describe petroleum because it's like biology? It's like we had that in clean beauty with people saying, oh, get away from chemicals. Like, but then water's a chemical, you know, like technically, you know, so there's all this weird kind of difficulty I think a lot of sustainable brands have in trying to really develop a lexicon and get that message across. And anyone who's asking questions, if you can hold them until the next 15 minutes, we'll get into those there, and we'll definitely talk a bit about algae, and it's been out there. So, and that's definitely something we can get into too. Algae foam is a big part of it, and there are some questions whether it's not actually sustainable or not and actually ecologically safe. So we can probably talk about that. But Tim, I'd love to hear from you, because you are repurposing these materials. You're making, like you said, now you're at 30%. How much does that change, you know, the durability? How does that change? And should people stop worrying so much about their shoe if it's coming from a recycled source?
So it's interesting. There's I'm going to try to condense these thoughts, but there's a couple different things going on here. One, there's the consumer education, and that's a big piece of it. And that's how we all share our information, is as direct to consumer brands now, you lead with your story and with your consumer education. So we're sharing information in that way. We also have to, and this is like something that's really irked me with the industry, and it goes back to greenwashing and then standards, is we have to be honest with customers. It's like we're long past the day when the customer has to call out BS and like you basically have to wait to get caught. And that's sort of how marketing has worked up until now. And now it's like, no. And so like the approach that we've taken, and I think everybody on this call is sort of on that same page, is we're going to tell you exactly where we are. And Chloe, it goes back to what you were saying of like, don't let the perfect get in the way of the good or the great. As long as you're open and honest about where you're trying to get to and where you are right now. And if you're honest with it, the customer is going to trust you. And like, if anything, the last 40 years of hyper consumerism, we lost trust. It wasn't about a long-term relationship with the customer based on quality, durable goods. It was about how much, you know, stack them high, let them fly, all those terms of just like sell as much garbage as you can to juice the top line. What we're all talking about now is buy less, buy better. It's the same amount of capital that's in the pipeline. You're just buying less crap and buying more durable goods that are going to last longer and break down more. So people always say like, oh, but that's $30 is a luxury flip-flop. It depends on how you do that calculus. And there's a lot of conversation around breaking down the per wear cost of your goods now. And if you do it at that level, then it's actually not that different. And if you have quality goods that last a long time, then you need fewer of them in your closet. And yes, you can make space for trend in your closet, but keep space for staples also. So, you know, and so where I'm going with that is for us at 30% bio content, you know, so we were using castor oil to start. It was problematic for us because everything was sourced in the US. This was from India. We had total traceability to it, but it didn't fit into the narrative, one, and two, it's a land use issue long term. So like, and that's where algae comes in too, is like that there's some ecological issues there. What we use now is variable biomass oil as our input. So that takes plant biomass, forest biomass, animal waste stream, or municipal waste streams, basically ferments it down, and we get a homogeneous output that we can replace the fossil carbon in our chemistry chain with. And that's the magic, is we have to take that. The customer is expecting it to perform the same way. We work with our material supplier to make sure that the performance is matched before we bring it out to market. So we haven't lost anything. It's just you have to put in that work, and you have to put in that R&D time. I think what we're excited about with the local production model too is we can get things into the market really quickly. So that's part of how we do this and we think that's part of what's more sustainable too, is by not having a 1 year to 18 month lead time on development and prototyping. By being on opposite sides of the world, you can speed up those processes. And then I think the other thing is building in flexible marketing that allows us to not have to wait for a marketing cycle in order to move on to the next innovation also. Those are all parts of it. So in terms of end of life for our product, we're doing things in the meantime of like, we work with a rubber company in Jersey that takes our flip-flops at end of life, cuts them up and puts it into a product called Bondaflex that then goes into like dams and things like that as for expansion joints. So that's not the perfect long term for us, but hey, it's a hell of a lot better than what's been happening in the past, and it's at least a step. And that's the key thing, is we're making sure that our consumer knows it's imperfect, but it's better than what has been, and it's only one step on the path for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it's kind of like this idea that transparency can maybe be the new luxury, or could be the new standard, right? And understanding. And I thought it was really interesting. I was in a Clubhouse chat the other day, not to call anyone out, but I was like, well, how much, you say Nike is doing innovation and you're saying sustainable is number one, but then it was like, well, if it doesn't perform at the highest level, we will just use the non-sustainable material. So to me, I was like, okay, so then it's not your guiding principle. And I understand it. If you're a performance company, that's number one. But I think part of it too is understanding, how quickly certain things are going to come to market, and how certain brands can really, focus on having sustainability as important as performance. And I'm curious too, when you're using these kind of materials that you're reusing, how do you make sure that they perform at a high level, and how important is that? So maybe Olivier, I know, because that's part of making sure you have a product I know you don't like the term upcycling, but when you're using, a material again, how can you make sure, and how much time does it take to make sure it retains integrity?
We need to do, like on the product, when we do those things, we need to test, because what we sell is, we sell performance for sure, and there are different level of performance. For basketball, you have Jordan, and you have the kids who want to play. You've got every level of performance. So at the beginning, and that's what we did with Index. It's not, I would say, it's a training shoe. It's not a racing shoe, and we adapt the product to the level we could reach, and we still have some less sustainable product, just integrating some recycled material and things like that, which are not on the concept of really a closed loop. And that's something we can do on a really high performance shoe. And on the other hand, we have those kind of shoe that we are developing with a really closed loop and cradle to cradle. And those one today, they are at a level of a training shoe, but we are pushing the development in order to reach the highest level. But we have to deal with it and make some progress on that in order to reach this performance level. And today, everybody is running for performance, but is it always needed? Sometimes what we see is we've got some people buying a shoe for trail running. You might not know, but like Kilian Jornet, who is a big trail running guy, if you don't run frequently, it might be not the best shoe for you for running. So it's nice to wear them, but you can enjoy yourself by wearing them. So that's another issue. So we need to we are working on that, on educating the consumer on what he's buying at the same time, because it might not be needed for him to buy the best one in terms of performance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see that all, that's how Jordan became what they are today. How many people who wanted to line up and collect, even me, I don't play basketball. Do I have too many Jordans? Yes. But that was because, it was style, it was story, it was so much more. It was marketing. So it's almost like we need that sort of energy in more sustainable products. And I think that's also part of it, is people are kind of overestimated maybe what they need. And maybe part of that future of footwear too is, again, this less but better models. Like, do you really need 3 different kinds of training shoes, right? Is the future maybe more focused on cross training and a few really specific performances? Is it focused on an everyday shoe? So I think that's something that's going to be really interesting, because, there's over 300 million sneakers that are thrown out every year. They're going to, for most people, when they throw out shoes, the shoes are going to outlive them in a dump. So I think it's kind of about turning that narrative around and seeing what makes sense. So I think you made a good point too, and I think we've all kind of talked about this. It's the consumer education, model, is how do we really make sure that consumers understand? And I'm not just talking about someone who's like, oh, I'm going to go running, I need a pair of shoes. How do we bring it to the sneaker community? Because this is where this panel came from. Like Nick, who produced it, I've known for 10 years through a million different jobs, and we're always united by and kind of come in and out of passion for sneakers. So how do we really make sure it resonates with people who collect, who are a part of the culture? And what can we kind of do to make sure that point comes across? Is it being really intentional? Is it calling out when brands are like, oh, it's recycled, but it's only 5%? What? I'm just going to throw this out and see, what do you guys think we need to do?
Can I just jump in?
Yeah, always, please.
One thing you have to think is we are on the fast consuming right now.
Yeah.
And everybody wants to have his product within 24 hours when he's ordering something on any kind of website or anything like that. But just take an idea. Transporting a shoe from Asia with a plane, the impact of CO2 is around 6 kilos. Transporting the same shoe with a sea boat, an ocean boat, is about 100 grams to 200 grams of CO2 impact. So, and you can move this way of thinking to any product in the US, in Europe, that people are asking for a 24 hours delivery, meaning that most of the time the 24 hours delivery is done by airplane. What's the difference of impact if he asks this delivery only in 3 days from now or 4 days from now? When you ask a shoe, I don't think you need it right the day after. So just my thought.
It's like the Amazonification, right? We're all like, okay, it's.
I didn't speak about any brand.
Not to call them out, but we especially in a city like New York, we're like, you mean I can't get it in 24 hours? Oh, I don't want it anymore. We have this kind of instant consumer culture. So maybe part of it too is, and I think maybe in some ways the pandemic has given people that pause, because we're at home more, we're taking more time, we're being more intentional. So I don't know, Jeremy, I think you work with so many mix of different creatives. Are you noticing, you mentioned from a design point of view, they're really excited, but are you noticing, let's say the people who are coming to say your Instagram page and seeing all these different designs, do you think there's a narrative shift? Do you think people are understanding it more, or at least more open to it?
For sure. I was going to jump in when you posed the original question and said the short answer is we just need to flip the table, because we need to challenge the system of just mass consumeration, or consumerism rather, because to Olivia's point is we're consuming too quickly and wanting it instantly in this social instant gratification phase that we're in. But also we're doing that on a weekly, for some people it's daily or every other day, right? Depending on the drops, where they're just consuming so much at a high rate. And to your point, no one's really questioning where is that waste going. So we need to ask that question first and foremost. It needs to be presented not only to the consumers, but to the brands, and say, okay, where is your waste going? And what are you actually doing with it? much like our government, not to make it political, but we need to really examine what the systems are so that we can then make it an equitable system for everyone involved. And that's, changing leadership as we've seen, but that's also just challenging the narratives with new perspectives. I mean, someone like AOC came in and literally shook the table, right? Shook it up to a way that it's empowered and inspired so many people to just put in these brand new institutions of change. So that needs to happen. And this is not just within footwear, this is just the larger industry of consumerism. Just obviously this is sort of the bring back in sneakers is, it is a big problem. And it's a problem that a lot of us, from a cultural standpoint, we've lived. I mean, when similar to you, Megan, I've had hundreds of pairs of Jordans, right? And when I graduated from the School of Sustainability, I made a pact to myself that, since changed, but I was like, I have 7 sneakers. And this is pre-StockX, this is pre all of that. I sold used shoes on eBay for more than I paid retail for them. It's mind-blowing. So just in that, value of a product is not necessarily what the brand determines. But to your point, that life cycle doesn't just start and end with that first consumer. And that could look like repurposing, or that could look like just redistribution, right? And giving it to those that actually need it or can do something else with it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Chloe and Tim, do you find you have a lot of issues with really connecting with your consumer and getting them to understand? I know you both seem to get these consumers who are real evangelists for you, which I think is awesome. And I think that's great because once they understand, they get it, they buy in, right? And I think, but how do you kind of reach out and get more people and make sure they get there? Is it about, I feel like we're in this time of if it's not an infographic, people don't care. It needs to be shareable, it needs to be digital, but what has kind of been maybe some of the issues that you guys have had, or also how have you found a great way to communicate with them clearly about standards and importance?
Tim, I'll start and then we can tag team.
That sounds good.
This is, I don't think we have an unlock quite yet. We're a year old now, or just over a year. And when we first launched, all of our launch materials were full circle footwear. The future is circular. Sneakers are not trash. And that netted us a very awesome, super awesome core community that we call Friend of the Future. We have a couple hundred people around the brand that are, as you mentioned, evangelists, or who are really working with their own life towards sustainable fashion or, eco-activism. And they're in a great, actually super diverse young community throughout the US. But it's small. This is our Halo group. And now our challenge this year, going into year 2 and just starting to build our team, we were a team of 2 for the entire last year. Now the goal is, how do we start to expand, and how do we bring, different communities and different people into the mission? And I think there's a few things that we're thinking about there. And I think one of them, Jeremy, you mentioned when you first started speaking, that we recognize. We deliberately started with a super basic, your perfect everyday shoe, because we wanted to make, the statement of 1,000 Foot was about material and recycling. But now as we expand, I think we need to expand design to be equitable design that speaks to different communities, because even if you're going to have 7 shoes, or especially if you're only going to have 7 shoes, they got to be 7 kick-ass shoes that you actually want to wear, that speak to your wardrobe and your outfit and your culture and your community. And I get that. So that's one of the first places we're looking, is how do we expand design, but within our materials, to bring more people in. And then second, the durability question, one of the number one, we get a lot of, not hate, but you get a lot of, especially when your audience is 18 to 24, comments on Instagram and Snapchat. And there's a few themes that are really honest. One is why would I pay $100 when I could pay 60 for, X shoe? So price point, really thinking about price point. And the other is, I'm not going to wear that it's not leather. Leather is great. And so this goes back to the conversation about how do we educate around new materials. And what we've really identified is actually a selling point, a consumer need within footwear, is durability. And so this is this idea that you guys keep mentioning about, when will things break down? I think it's quite interesting, because we're not a performance shoes. We're not focused on performance, but we have, Satra tested and strength tested all of our materials. So the shoe, 2.4 million steps every day. 10,000 steps for 8 months, right? And so it should last up. I don't think we're doing a good enough job communicating that. But I think what is interesting though is within footwear, and part of the reason we're all thinking about end of life is footwear unfortunately does have a half-life. Like if it is a shoe or a sandal or a running shoe that you're wearing 10,000 steps a day, at some point it can't be resold. And so I think what Jeremy's talking about with StockX and resale, like the way we look at the circular economy is there's rental, which would be so great if it worked for sneakers, but it doesn't really work for sneakers because you don't want to put your foot in someone else's shoe. Resale, which really works for higher price point, limited edition, or like, a Chanel, like a really designer shoe, but you're not reselling your Stan Smiths or your like old Converse, and then recycling. And so those, like, we consider, everyday shoes kind of like intimates, and we'd like to have a certain amount of durability, but at some point in time, like that really, mass market everyday shoe is going to break down. And I think that's the education we're trying to work through. It's not that it's not durable. It's just, we have to be as durable as a comparative shoe in that price point and that end use. And so those are kind of the things we're thinking about when I'm thinking about new communities and durability and education. And it's a lot. It's a lot more than just selling a fashion product, I think, or like a new hype drop. But Tim, I want to hear how you've been.
No, it's like it's all the same points, and I think it's just we're in the brands that are trying to do it the right way are actually swimming upstream because we're the ones doing the heaviest lifting of the consumer education. And thank God we have brands like Solomon, we have brands like Patagonia out there also at scale having these conversations that then we can apply those learnings to. But the truth of the matter is, it's if you have a ton of VC capital behind you and you can go blanket every F train stop, you have a leg up. But most of us don't have that. It's give you a little bit and go prove it. And when you have to do the amount of consumer education that we have to do, it's really effing difficult to actually do that, because it's not just here, check this thing out, it's cheap and it's cute. We have to say it's better. Here's why you should feel good about it. The consumers that we're going to also have some of the highest BS detectors out there. So you're not only just saying like, hey, it's sustainable. That doesn't work anymore. The customers that we're trying to seed with, and Chloe and Jeremy that you're talking to, Olivier, who you guys are marketing to, these are people that are into this and they're living this lifestyle. And so they're going to actually take a little bit longer to adopt you, most likely, because they have to sniff out, are you guys actually serious? Right. So like for us, part of being B Corp certified, and then we got our polyurethane USDA bio-preferred certified, that for us was shorthand to the customer of like, yo, you can trust us. It's not just us saying this. This is third-party certified. We're honest, and the product is what we say it is, and the percentage is stamped on it, And I think that's been some of the problem with eco-friendly and all these different things. And I'll say we're working with politically in fashion, and I think that there's pushback on, do you want more government regulation, blah blah blah. As long as this free market economy that is a sham, that it's actually a free market, as long as there's subsidies and lobbyism and all these different things, it's not a free market. It's also, yes, we need regulation until we don't, so there is a big push right now to actually have the FTC update their guidelines and their standards because they have not been updated since 2012. So in terms of marketing speak and all this, it's the wild, wild west. So until the bigger companies that we have to compete with for airspace without the resources that they are resourced with, we're going to need help from the government to come in and put the kibosh on those claims that they're making now.
Yeah, I completely agree. Do you think also part of it, I mean, I was going to say they rhyme with small birds, but obviously all birds, like, a company that has a massive marketing budget, like you said, like, especially if you can win a city like New York, that's amazing. But part of that is you need so much money, right, to get out there. And I think part of it maybe is the messaging was different, because I look at a company like that, I'm like, well, just because you make from wool doesn't mean you're, organic, that you're still making in China. So I think there's sometimes this problem with the messaging by these bigger brands wasn't always consistent and clear, and then it's hurting the smaller brands, right? And it's hurting the upstarts because now the customer is like, wait, Adidas said it's sustainable. I'm just going to buy Adidas. It's fine. We're like, it's just recycled plastic. Like, there's still so much more to it, right? So I think maybe part of it too is, again, getting back to that idea of like having partnerships, having it be a community. And that's such, again, like the beauty of something like the sneaker community. Like, yeah, we met because we love shoes, but most of my best friends I met through sneakers. I met because you had a connection, you had something that's shared, right? So now it's like, now can we take that and use that, you know, to make the world a better place or whatever, you know, and to kind of save things, right? I think we kind of have to lean into that a bit too and understand and make sure the consumers know too, like, okay, like maybe it's not clear. I feel like it's kind of like organic. I know France is way better at this, Olivier. Like I went to see my family in France and the food was like so much better that I was like, you know, my family has a biologic farm and I was like, oh my God, it's so much better than what we have in Canada. But, you know, it was more clear. And then I went to California and I'm like, everything's organic, but it's not. You know, I think, again, it's that idea of standards, right? There isn't a set standard of this is what's sustainable, this is what's organic, you know, and I think that's a big problem in footwear too. You know, I think it's just going to be, you know, a big system change. And I think it's going to be interesting. So from there, I think would be great to get an idea of like, what are you guys really excited about in terms of what's coming next for sustainability? And what do you think a sneakerhead watching or someone who likes footwear but is still kind of confused, where can they kind of have an entry point? Because we've had a few people in the chat, you know, asking about like, what about algae foam and being better about staying away from single use? But in terms of footwear, you know, how can they make a positive impact outside of just, you know, buying the shoe? And what should they really look for? It's a long question, but you know. Any thoughts?
I mean, you could give a 30-minute answer on that one, but I think,
right?
I mean, the first thing for any consumer is to evaluate their own consumer habits first. That's the first thing that you can do to make a positive impact, is to say, what do I do in my own household? What's the frequency with which I'm buying? Am I buying everything through Amazon on my Prime account? Like, that was one of the first things I did, was killed the Prime account. I don't shop that way anymore. I haven't for a long time. And then start to pare down your closet. And like, we live in a society where we're marketed to all the time, nonstop, 24/7, 365. So, you know, it's really about evaluating where you are in that, what your habits are, and then where you want to go and figure out your own path into that. But I think, like, you know, as much as I want to say it's on the consumers, it's on the brands, you know? And so consumers, the other thing they can do is the same way you call your district attorney if you're upset about, you know, justice in terms of the legal system, call out brands, because like, until there are guidelines, it's not about cancel culture. It's about accountability. I don't like the cancel culture mindset because it sounds like it's unfair. The unfairness is in the disingenuousness with the customers.
I think so. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Oh, I was saying I 100% agree with that. I think so trying to like respond to what you said, Tim, but also like answer the question. Can you repeat the question again as well, Megan? Or?
I mean, I think I was just getting a little excited about everything that's coming, because I think there's all these tech coming out, right? You're like, oh, it's castor bean, it's algae, but what maybe are you most excited about coming from sustainability, and maybe something that, you know, consumers can look to and maybe grasp, like, oh, this is actually something that is exciting for me, or this is something that I, you know, want to get into. And I think to Tim's point too, calling brands out is obviously important. For me, it's like, I don't care if it costs me getting free shoes. I don't want to do it in a mean way, but, you know, I think it's important to keep people accountable, like we do with politicians, like we do, you know, like what 100%. Tim said with DAs. So feel free to.
For sure. Yeah. So I think it was the first point you said, Tim, and thank you, Megan, for that. But it's about just sort of like the self-evaluation. And for me, it's so in school studying sort of the index and indices, like there's no UN, there's no lead system, right, for footwear. So something like that comes from consumer education and comes from, I mean, of course, these external agencies that sort of put all the data together and you know, make it palatable. So it's something like that, but also it's being aware of your own consumer habits, to Tim's point. But also really look into, you know, this idea of greenwashing and what that actually means. And I think you had touched on it, Megan, and kind of going to California and everything's sustainable, right? At one point, everyone was just like their narrative was just we're going green. I mean, for some folks, that was just changing the light bulbs in the building to LEDs, and for other folks, it was like really examining the materials and what they were doing. So it is to that point of Tim and sort of holding them accountable, but also, just really start to educate yourselves. There's a lot of platforms out there on, a lot of the social medias that are doing sort of the work in gathering the information and making it palatable. We live in an information economy, so if you're sort of miseducated or misdirected in some senses, ask questions. I'm open to questions. My team is certainly open to questions. It's theories that we want to help solve and prove specifically for brands, including obviously the creators, but brands as well, and making that just a very cohesive conversation. So that's what excites me most is really sort of reshifting the narrative. And I think in some cases brands have gotten it right, and in a lot of cases brands have gotten it wrong, and it's been more of a PR move and marketing move versus like actually moving to something that is real. This whole sort of net zero is a lofty dream, in my opinion. You're always going to have some give back, and that's okay. The idea is really to minimize what that is. So, sort of framing the narrative is, we're net zero or we're moving to that. It's like, yeah, well, sure. Well, I'm going to live on Mars. Okay. So.
Yeah. Well, I think you hit on something too, is like, it was treated as a trend. So it was like, oh, it's a PR move. Like, we're just going to do this and blah. And it's like, it's not a trend. This is systemic. And it's the future, and it's what we have to move towards. And so we have to treat it like that, not as like the latest color,
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Chloe.
A couple of just comments to build on that. I mean, we get asked this question constantly, like from our community or from just panels, but like, what can I do in my own wardrobe? What can I do next? Like, I'm bought in. And the number one thing I start with is like, if I think about myself, like, even 6 years ago, I didn't know half of what I know now. So the first step is really education, because we've seen things flashing here on these comments of people not trusting even certain certifications because of who might be funding them or what they might be associated with. And so the best thing you can do is educate yourself, and within fashion and footwear, to really get to understand the materials, because there are businesses out there advertising footwear that is circular by design, or has some other like move to net zero, but then you look at it, they bought carbon offsets somewhere in the southern hemisphere on a rainforest they're not even associated with, and so it is marketing. And I have faith, and one of the things that I think we're super excited about on the coming down the pipeline is actually a more educated consumer class, because it's what we've seen a shift, especially starting June last year, in the social justice movement and the youth movement here in the US, and then through the election here in the US, we've seen a massive shift, particularly with this younger consumer base, in wanting to be educated, not wanting to be told, not wanting to be marketed to. We probably get questions in our inbox, like, I don't know, 5 to 10 times a week, not days a week, but of like, hey, can you tell me more about this part of your supply chain? Where I was reading on this, like, I want to make a purchase, but can you confirm this? And it's a huge increase from like earlier in the year and even pre-COVID. And just this idea that you as an individual can have an impact, and that consumers are, I would say, especially with this younger subset, choosing to become more educated and more involved in their purchasing decisions. And I think that's super exciting, because I think it's something that bigger brands and bigger businesses won't be able to ignore for long. And then even with a lot of the announcements that we're hearing from these bigger brands about committing to circularity or committing to, XYZ in their supply chain by 2030, 2040, I think it's coming on the heels of that. And so I'm super excited. It is definitely, Tim, a brand onus, but I think it's being hastened by a consumer class.
Agreed.
Well, that at least is like a little uplifting. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Olivier, as we wrap up?
It's complicated to add something, but what I would say is it's a global consumer behavior. We are just speaking about sneakers, even if we know that apparel and footwear is a big polluting industry. I think it's not the major one. There are a lot of polluting company, and I think every step is a good step. For sure, there are a lot of marketing behind that in order to. It's really the trend right now, and company, they need to communicate a lot on that, even if sometimes the communication is not perfect, and they communicate more about that than what they do. But and that's, I come back to what all of you have said before. Today we can find a lot of information about transparency of the company, about what is real, what is not real, about what has an impact, and we come back to education. And the thing is, a company who is speaking about something, and if it's not true, it's going to come alive quick and quicker than what it was 20 years ago. So, and I think having a shoe with recycled material is a good step. Having a shoe with algae is a good first step. It's not the best. It's maybe not the best, but at least it's a first step. For sure, what we have to think now is, and that's what I push in Salomon, is we have to think at the end of life of the product and really be able to use the material again. Because anyway, including some recycled material, the big issue today is we are mixing all the material together, and it means that that's what I told you, Megan, is we speak about downcycling, we speak about upcycling, but we never do upcycling. We do isocycling. That's the best we can do. It's using the material the same way, but we can't use the material a better way. So, and that's what we need to do, is to be able to use the material the same way, by the way we are building the product, by the way we are taking care of the end of life. And the main issue today for footwear, and it's the same thing for apparel, is the collecting system. The collecting system are done to gather all the product, a Nike product, any kind of product. And so we don't know what's in the product. So that's the main issue. So if we want to be really on a circular loop, we need to find a solution. Salomon set up this solution, and other companies have set up solution in order to really gather the material at the end in order to ensure the recycling. It's not a long-term solution. We need to find something, and that's why companies need to work together on that.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of has to be a joint effort to get us to the next step, right? I think that's a really good point. And then one last point just from the chat that I think we should also address too is, like, I think there's this idea that sustainability is only if you have money. You know, when in reality we need to realize, like, the indigenous communities are the most sustainable communities. Like, we can learn from people who have been doing it their whole lives. Like, how can we learn from these people, understand questions, and make sure that we find a way that it's not just for people who have this specific aesthetic of being recycled, right? We need to make sure that we can reach more people who could benefit and could use these products, and it could make their life better, but maybe because of the price range, it's really hard for them to access it.
Well, I mean, that kind of speaks. That's like the best way to summarize this whole conversation, though, is like, the money needs to keep going there. We need to invest in it. Big brands need to invest in it. We need to share information to get to economies of scale faster. We need to work together to get to economies of scale faster. People in the comment section, I see it. You're not wrong. Like, there are more expensive technologies than what we have now, but if you combine less but better with that, along with everybody diving in on this, and if we are shifting the investment, which is already happening, the ESG financial sector is year over year, it's like doubling every year. That's a good sign, and that's going to get us there. But as long as we're shifting the consumerism mindset away from have as much cheap stuff as you can have to, and frankly, we need wage increases, and that goes back to local manufacturing and local jobs and local communities built up around this. Those all play in with each other of how we're going to get there. So I actually couldn't think of a better way to close this out.
That's great. Thanks so much, Tim. You did my job for me. Thanks. Appreciate that. But just as we wrap up, if everyone wants to share where they can find you, and We're not here to necessarily to shill product, but maybe to educate where people, have people find out where you are. So Jeremy, if you want to start where people can find you and connect with you online.
Yeah, can you hear me? My headphones.
Yeah, great.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so personal is jeremym.green on most platforms, and just Jeremy Green on LinkedIn. And then the social for Calling All Creators is just Calling All Creators all together. So
easy.
Yep.
Olivier, Tim, Chloe, you wanna share?
Go for it, Tim.
Olivier, it's all you, man.
That's an easy one. You can find me on LinkedIn with Olivier Mouzin, and I can't give you my my email address, so sorry, but otherwise I will have too many. So
yeah, but it's Solomon Sport, I think, on
Solomon
Instagram.
Sport. Yeah. Salomonsport.com.
Great.
Exactly, and you
Perfect.
can see all the product from Salomon.
Yeah. Tim?
Yeah. www.titlenewyork.com is our site. Our handle is @TitleNewYork. So if you need some flip flops, come on over.
Everybody, Chloe?
Great. Yeah, find us on thousandfell.com or @1000_fell. And I check the DM, so I'll be there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thanks to people who are contributing in the chat. We really appreciate it. It's just great to get this conversation going. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm She Got Game on Instagram and Twitter. And I have a podcast and newsletter that's all about the intersection of sustainability and footwear and style. And Chloe was on my podcast, but I just moved. So I promise it's coming next week. But we'll be there. We'll keep sharing. Let's keep the narrative going. And let's make sure we can get more people understanding what's really happening in footwear and push things forward.
Great.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys.
Great
Nice
to
to
meet
meet
you all.
Thank you. Nice to meet
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Bye.
Bye.